The moment I heard my son Marcus tell his wife, "Don't worry, the old deaf bat will be gone soon, and we'll have everything," was the moment I realized my 3 years of silence had been worth every second of deception. For 78 years, I had prided myself on being Martha Beaumont, a woman who spoke her mind and never backed down from the truth.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
But 3 years ago, after a minor stroke that temporarily affected my hearing, I made a decision that would change everything. When my hearing returned after 6 weeks, I chose to keep pretending I was deaf. What I discovered during those 3 years of strategic silence would shock anyone who thought they knew their family. My name is Martha Beaumont, and I built my life on the belief that family comes first, honesty matters most, and hard work should be rewarded with loyalty. I raised 4 children as a single mother after my husband died in a construction accident when I was only 35. I worked 2 jobs, sacrificed my own dreams, and put every penny I could save toward giving my children opportunities I never had. By the time I was ready to retire, I had accumulated more than my children knew. The small house in Millbrook that I'd bought for $23,000 was now worth over $800,000 in today's market. The life insurance money from my husband, carefully invested over 4 decades, had grown into a substantial portfolio. My late-night cleaning job at the law firm of Sandler and Associates had included profit sharing that accumulated quietly in accounts my children never knew existed. I wasn't wealthy by some standards, but I was comfortable. More importantly, I had planned to leave everything to my 4 children equally. Marcus, my oldest, had always been my pride and joy. A successful real estate developer who'd built a small empire of rental properties throughout the county. Chloe, my youngest daughter, was a dedicated teacher who struggled financially but never complained. Nick, my middle son, worked as a mechanic and lived paycheck to paycheck despite his skill and dedication. And Edith, my eldest daughter, had married well and lived in the affluent Beaumont Hills neighborhood that coincidentally shared our family name. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years ago. I was tending to my garden when suddenly the world tilted sideways and I found myself on the ground, unable to hear anything but a constant ringing. The neighbors called an ambulance, and within hours my children had gathered at Millbrook General Hospital, their faces etched with concern that seemed genuine at the time. Dr. Theo Hill, the neurologist, explained that the stroke was minor, but had affected the auditory processing center of my brain. The hearing loss may be temporary, he told my family while I lay in the hospital bed. These things can resolve themselves over time, but there's no guarantee. We'll need to monitor her progress carefully. For 6 weeks, I truly was deaf. The silence was profound and terrifying, cutting me off from conversations, television, even the birds I loved to watch in my backyard. My children visited regularly during this period, communicating through hastily written notes and exaggerated gestures. Marcus hired a live-in aide, a kind woman named Mabel Hill, who coincidentally shared the doctor's surname, though they weren't related. Then on a quiet Sunday morning, I woke up and heard Mabel humming in the kitchen downstairs. The sound was like a miracle, bringing tears to my eyes as I realized my hearing had returned completely. I should have celebrated immediately, should have called my children to share the wonderful news. Instead, I found myself frozen by something I overheard. Mabel was on the phone with someone, speaking in hushed tones but not quietly enough. "No, she still can't hear anything," she was saying. "Marcus wants me to keep detailed records of everything she does, where she keeps important papers, what her daily routine is like. He's paying me extra to report back weekly. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own son was having me spied upon in my own home, treating my disability as an opportunity for surveillance. But before I could process this fully, I heard something that made me decide to remain silent about my recovered hearing. Marcus's voice came through the phone speaker, loud enough for me to catch fragments. Need to know about any accounts she hasn't told us about. When the time comes, power of attorney. The house alone is worth. In that moment, I made a decision that would define the next 3 years of my life. I would let them think I was still deaf. I would listen, learn, and discover exactly what my children really thought of their mother when they believed she couldn't hear them. The education I received over the following weeks was devastating and illuminating in equal measure. Marcus visited twice a week, always bringing his wife Chloe Nylon, who had taken his name when they married, confusingly sharing a first name with my daughter. During these visits, while I sat in my chair pretending to focus on my knitting, or stare blankly at the television, they would discuss their plans with shocking callousness. The neurologist says these things can go either way, Marcus would tell his wife. She could recover, or she could get worse. We need to be prepared for both scenarios. What about the other kids? Chloe Nylon would ask. Nick and Edith and your sister Chloe. They don't need to know everything yet, Marcus would reply. I'm the oldest, and I've been managing Mom's finances anyway. When the time comes, I'll handle the distribution. This was news to me. While I had given Marcus power of attorney for medical decisions after the stroke, I had never authorized him to manage my finances. Yet somehow, he seemed to believe he had that authority, or perhaps he was planning to claim it. The most chilling conversation came during their third visit, when Marcus's wife mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Mabel says she's been asking about some investment papers, Chloe Nylon said, glancing toward the kitchen where our aide was preparing lunch. Apparently she keeps pointing to the desk and making gestures toward some folder. Marcus nodded grimly. I'll need to go through everything when she's at her doctor's appointment next week. There might be accounts she never told us about. The house is just the beginning. I have a feeling the old woman has been hiding money for years. The casual cruelty of referring to me as the old woman, while sitting in my living room, believing I couldn't hear them, revealed something about my son's character that I had somehow missed during all the years I thought I knew him. But this was only the beginning of what I would learn during my 3 years of strategic deafness. Over the next several months, I learned more about my family's true nature than I had in the previous 7 decades of my life. My carefully maintained facade of deafness became a window into a world I never knew existed, a world where my children viewed me not as their mother, but as an obstacle to their inheritance. My journey to this point hadn't been easy. Born Martha Hill in 1945 in the small farming community of Cedar Ridge, I was the daughter of a seamstress and a dairy farmer who believed that hard work and moral character were the only currencies that truly mattered. My parents, Edith and Theo Hill, raised me with the understanding that family loyalty was sacred and that you never spoke ill of your own blood, no matter the circumstances. I met my late husband, Robert Beaumont, at a church social when I was 19. He was 23, broad-shouldered and gentle-eyed, working construction during the week and taking engineering classes at night. We married after a 2-year courtship that my parents insisted upon, believing that patience and love led to lasting commitment. Those early years were golden. Robert and I bought our first home in Millbrook for $23,000, a modest 3-bedroom cottage with a large backyard where we planned to raise our children. Marcus arrived first in 1968, followed by Edith in 1970, Nick in 1972, and finally our surprise baby, Chloe, in 1975. Robert's death in 1980 shattered our world but didn't break our family's foundation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
A crane accident at the construction site took him instantly, leaving me with 4 children under 12 and a life insurance policy that seemed enormous at the time, $50,000, but would need to stretch much further than anyone anticipated. I made decisions in those early months of widowhood that would shape everything that followed. Instead of moving to a smaller house or accepting charity from my parents, I chose to work multiple jobs to maintain our home and lifestyle. During the day, I worked as a secretary at Millbrook Elementary School, earning enough to cover our basic expenses. 3 evenings a week, I cleaned offices at the law firm of Sandler and Associates, a job that paid cash and included a profit-sharing plan I didn't fully understand at the time. The children adapted to our new reality with the resilience that only children possess. Marcus, at 12, appointed himself the man of the house, helping with his younger siblings and taking on responsibilities that now, looking back, may have been too much for a child. Edith became my little helper, organizing the household and keeping her brothers in line. Nick developed a quiet strength, spending hours tinkering with broken appliances and bicycles, discovering the mechanical aptitude that would later define his career. And Chloe, barely 5 when her father died, grew up believing that mothers could do anything. What my children didn't know was how carefully I managed every penny that came into our household. The life insurance money went immediately into conservative investments, recommended by Mr. Marcus Sandler, the senior partner at the law firm where I worked. He took a paternal interest in my situation, perhaps because his own wife had been widowed young, and he guided me toward mutual funds and savings bonds that would grow slowly but steadily over the decades. The profit sharing from my cleaning job accumulated in an account I rarely touched, growing from hundreds to thousands to eventually tens of thousands as the law firm prospered and my length of service increased. When the firm was sold to a larger practice in 1995, my share of the sale proceeds was deposited into an account that even I sometimes forgot existed. Meanwhile, our little house in Millbrook appreciated steadily as the town grew from a rural community into a desirable suburb. The cornfield behind our backyard became a shopping center. The empty lots on our street filled with larger, more expensive homes. Property values climbed year after year, turning my modest $23,000 investment into something much more substantial. Through it all, I maintained the same frugal lifestyle that had sustained us during those difficult early years. I clipped coupons, shopped sales, and never bought anything new when something used would suffice. My children interpreted this behavior as necessity rather than choice, never realizing that their mother had gradually accumulated significant wealth through decades of careful planning and patient investment. As my children grew into adults, each developed their own relationship with money that reflected their personalities and life experiences. Marcus channeled his early sense of responsibility into business success, building a real estate empire that made him wealthy in his own right. Edith married Nick Nylon, a surgeon who provided her with the comfortable lifestyle she had always craved. Nick remained blue-collar and proud of it, suspicious of his siblings' more affluent circumstances. And Chloe chose teaching, following her heart despite the modest financial rewards. I was proud of all of them, each in their own way. Marcus's success impressed me, even if his methods sometimes seemed a bit ruthless. Edith's marriage brought her happiness and security. Nick's integrity and work ethic reminded me of his father. Chloe's dedication to education honored the values I had tried to instill on all my children. What I failed to recognize, perhaps because I didn't want to see it, were the subtle ways that money and inheritance expectations had begun to influence their relationships with me and with each other. Marcus's increasing involvement in my financial affairs, which I had interpreted as loving concern, may have had more calculated motivations. Edith's frequent mentions of how the family house held so many memories perhaps masked more practical interests. Even Nick's comments about hoping I would never have to worry about money in my old age might have carried undertones I hadn't detected. The stroke that temporarily took my hearing also stripped away my illusions about family loyalty, revealing the complex web of expectations, resentments, and schemes that had been developing beneath the surface of our relationships for years. The years leading up to my stroke had been what I thought of as the golden period of our family relationships. My children were all established in their adult lives, successful in their own ways, and I believed we had achieved the kind of close-knit family dynamic that many people only dream about. Marcus had built Beaumont Properties into one of the most respected real estate development companies in the Tri-County area. His portfolio included over 200 rental units, 3 shopping centers, and a luxury apartment complex that bore the family name. He lived in a sprawling colonial in Millbrook Heights with his wife Chloe Nylon and their 2 teenage children, Marcus Jr. and little Martha, named after me. Their lifestyle was comfortable but not ostentatious. Marcus always said he preferred to reinvest his profits rather than flaunt his wealth. Every Sunday, Marcus would stop by my house for what he called our business meetings. He'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop, showing me charts and graphs that tracked my modest investment portfolio. "Mom, your money is working hard for you," he'd say with pride. "The mutual funds are performing well, and the house continues to appreciate. You're in better financial shape than most people your age." I appreciated his attention to these matters, especially since numbers had never been my strong suit. When he suggested transferring some of my accounts to his financial advisor for better management, it seemed like a natural step. "Family should handle family business," he explained, and I trusted his judgment completely. Edith had settled into her role as a surgeon's wife with apparent contentment. She lived in a meticulously maintained Victorian mansion in Beaumont Hills, where she hosted elaborate dinner parties and served on the boards of 3 different charities. Her husband Nick Nylon was a respected orthopedic surgeon at Millbrook Medical Center, and together they moved in the town's most elite social circles. Despite her busy social calendar, Edith never missed our monthly mother-daughter lunches at the Millbrook Country Club. She would pick me up in her Mercedes, always immaculately dressed and perfectly composed, treating these occasions as opportunities to catch me up on local society news and family developments. "You raised us right, Mother," she would often say, squeezing my hand across the white tablecloth. "We all turned out exactly as you hoped we would." During these lunches, Edith frequently brought up memories of our old house and how much it meant to our family. "That kitchen table where we did homework every night," she'd reminisce. "The backyard where Dad taught us to throw a baseball. The front porch where you'd sit and wait for us to come home from school. This house holds our entire family history." I was touched by her sentimentality, never considering that her frequent mentions of the house's emotional value might be preparing me for future conversations about its practical value. Nick had remained closest to his blue-collar roots, running Beaumont Auto Repair with the same dedication his father had shown in construction. His shop was known throughout the county for honest service and fair prices. He lived modestly with his wife Mabel Sandler, who had kept her maiden name in a small ranch house just 10 minutes from my place. Nick visited twice a week, usually after work, still wearing his mechanic's coveralls and smelling faintly of motor oil. He'd fix whatever needed fixing around my house, never accepting payment despite my insistence. "Family takes care of family, Mom," he'd say, echoing the values I'd taught him as a child. "You took care of us when we needed it. Now it's our turn." His wife Mabel was a nurse at the community hospital, and together they lived paycheck to paycheck despite working constantly. Nick never complained about money, but I could see the stress in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. More than once, I had quietly slipped him a few $100s, telling him it was just a little help and that he didn't need to mention it to his siblings. Chloe, my youngest, had followed her passion into teaching third grade at Millbrook Elementary, the same school where I had worked as a secretary decades earlier. She lived in a tiny apartment above the town bakery, drove a car that was older than some of her students, and spent her own limited income buying school supplies for children whose families couldn't afford them. Every Friday evening, Chloe would arrive at my house with a bag of groceries and cook dinner for both of us. We'd spend hours talking about her students, her dreams of eventually becoming a principal, and her frustrations with the education system. "I know I'll never be rich," she'd tell me while washing dishes at my kitchen sink, "but I'm making a difference. That's what matters, right, Mom?" These weekly dinners with Chloe were the highlight of my week. She was the only one of my children who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions rather than just my well-being. We'd discuss books we'd both read, current events, and family memories. She never mentioned money or inheritance, never seemed to calculate the value of the time she spent with me. During this golden period, I believed I had succeeded as a mother in every way that mattered. My children were successful, morally grounded, and committed to family values. Marcus's business acumen impressed me, Edith's social accomplishments made me proud, Nick's integrity reminded me of his father, and Chloe's dedication to helping others reflected the values I'd tried to instill in all of them. I had even begun making plans for how I would distribute my estate among them. Marcus, as the most financially sophisticated, would receive the investment portfolio and the responsibility of managing the family's financial legacy. Edith, with her appreciation for the house's sentimental value, would inherit the property itself. Nick, who had always struggled financially despite his hard work, would receive the largest cash bequest to ensure his security. And Chloe would get enough to pursue her educational dreams without worrying about money. These plans felt fair and appropriate, reflecting each child's needs and contributions to our family. I even scheduled an appointment with Theo Sandler, the son of my old boss, who had taken over the family law practice, to update my will and ensure everything was properly documented. I never made it to that appointment. The stroke changed everything. The first few months after my supposed hearing loss created a new dynamic in our family that I initially interpreted as touching concern for my welfare. Looking back now, I realize this period marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in how my children viewed me, not as their capable mother, but as an aging problem to be managed. Marcus immediately took charge of what he called Mom's Care Coordination. Within a week of my discharge from the hospital, he had hired Mabel Hill as my live-in aide, installed a medical alert system, and arranged for grocery delivery services. His efficiency impressed the doctors and his siblings, who praised his quick thinking and organizational skills. What they didn't know, and what I was only beginning to understand through careful observation, was how systematically Marcus was inserting himself into every aspect of my daily life. He arranged for all my mail to be forwarded to his office first, claiming he needed to screen it for important medical information. He convinced my bank to add him as a joint account holder on my checking account, explaining it was a precaution in case I needed help managing bills during my recovery. Most significantly, he obtained copies of all my financial statements under the guise of helping me organize my affairs. "Mom can't hear the phone anymore," he explained to various customer service representatives. "As her son, I need to be able to handle her business when she can't communicate properly." During his twice-weekly visits, Marcus would sit beside my chair and speak in exaggeratedly slow, clear syllables while showing me documents to sign. His wife Chloe Nylon would pat my hand sympathetically and mouth words like "poor thing" when she thought I wasn't looking directly at her. "We're just trying to make everything easier for you, Mom," Marcus would say, pointing to signature lines on papers I pretended not to understand. "These are just routine updates to your accounts, making sure everything is properly organized." I signed what he put in front of me, maintaining my facade of confused compliance while mentally noting every document. Power of attorney forms that went far beyond medical decisions. Investment account modifications that gave Marcus trading authority. Bank signature cards that essentially made him a co-owner of my assets. Edith's approach was more subtle but equally manipulative. She increased her visits to twice a week, always bringing photo albums and family mementos. "I thought we should go through these together, Mother," she would say, settling beside me on the sofa. "While you're recovering, it might be comforting to look at happy memories." But these sessions weren't really about nostalgia. Edith would carefully catalog every piece of jewelry, every antique, every valuable item in my house, while pretending to reminisce. "Oh, I remember this pearl necklace," she'd say, holding it up to the light. "Didn't Grandma Hill give this to you for your wedding? It must be worth quite a bit now." She began taking photographs of everything, claiming she wanted to create a digital family archive. Room by room, she documented my possessions with the thoroughness of an insurance adjuster. When I occasionally caught her measuring furniture or examining the backs of picture frames, she would smile sweetly and explain that she was just trying to preserve our family history. Most disturbing were her conversations with her husband when they thought I was napping in my chair. Dr. Nick Nylon would examine me with clinical detachment, discussing my condition as if I were a case study rather than his mother-in-law. "The hearing loss seems permanent," he would tell Edith in hushed tones. "At her age, with this type of stroke damage, recovery is unlikely. We need to start thinking about long-term care options." "The house is getting too big for her," Edith would reply. "She could fall down those stairs, or have another stroke and no one would know for hours. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living." These conversations about my future, conducted in my presence but without my input, revealed how quickly I had been reclassified from independent adult to dependent burden. The woman who had raised 4 children while working 2 jobs, who had managed household finances for decades, was now considered incapable of making her own decisions simply because they believed I couldn't hear. Nick's visits became more infrequent and seemed increasingly uncomfortable for him. He would arrive after work, fix whatever minor repairs Mabel had mentioned, and leave quickly without the easy conversation we had always enjoyed. When he did try to communicate, he would gesture awkwardly and speak in the oversimplified manner people often use with those they perceive as disabled. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he would ask, speaking each word slowly and loudly. When I didn't respond immediately, having learned that delayed reactions reinforced their assumptions about my hearing, he would turn to Mabel with visible frustration. "It's so hard to see her like this," he confided to his wife during one visit I overheard from the kitchen. "She was always so sharp, so in control of everything. Now she just sits there staring at nothing." "Maybe it's a blessing in a way," Mabel Sandler replied softly. "She doesn't have to worry about anything anymore. Marcus is handling all the complicated stuff." The casual assumption that my apparent disability somehow absolved me of adult responsibilities was both insulting and illuminating. In their minds, my hearing loss had transformed me from a competent individual into a childlike dependent who needed decisions made for her. Chloe remained the most consistent in her behavior, still arriving every Friday with groceries and still cooking our traditional dinner together. But even she had begun adapting to what she perceived as my limitations. She would write notes for everything now, simple messages in large block letters. "Dinner ready," or "How do you feel?" During these Friday dinners, I noticed her studying me with the analytical eye of an educator, as if trying to assess my cognitive function. She would speak more slowly, repeat herself frequently, and watch my face intently for signs of comprehension. "I worry about you being alone here all week, Mom," she wrote on one of her note cards. "Maybe we should think about getting you more help." The gradual erosion of their confidence in my capabilities was both fascinating and heartbreaking to witness. Within just a few months, the family dynamic had completely reversed. Instead of being the family matriarch whose opinions and preferences mattered, I had become a problem to be solved, an obligation to be managed. By the 6th month of my supposed deafness, small incidents began accumulating that transformed my mild unease into active suspicion. What I had initially dismissed as natural adjustments to my condition were revealing themselves as something far more calculated and disturbing. The first red flag came during one of Marcus's routine visits when he thought I was dozing in my chair. He was on his phone with someone, speaking in the clipped, business-like tone he used for important calls. Through barely cracked eyelids, I watched him pace near the window while discussing what sounded like property transactions. "The Millbrook location is perfect," he was saying. "Corner lot, established neighborhood, excellent development potential. We just need to wait for the right timing." There was a pause as he listened to the other party. No complications. The current owner won't be an issue much longer. These situations resolve themselves naturally. When Mabel entered the room carrying a tea tray, Marcus quickly ended the call and returned to his normal demeanor. But his words echoed in my mind. Current owner won't be an issue much longer. Was he talking about my house? And what did he mean by situations resolving themselves naturally? The next incident occurred during one of Edith's increasingly frequent visits. She had brought her teenage daughter, little Martha, who I hadn't seen in months. While Edith photographed family portraits in my living room, supposedly for her digital archive project, I overheard Martha asking innocent but pointed questions. "Grandma looks different, Mom. Smaller somehow. Is she getting sicker?" "Strokes can be progressive, honey," Edith replied, adjusting the angle of a photograph. "At Grandma's age, we have to be prepared for anything. That's why it's important to preserve these memories now. Will we still be able to visit her if she has to move?" "Of course, sweetheart. Wherever Grandma goes, we'll make sure she's comfortable and well cared for." The casual assumption that I would be moving somewhere, combined with Edith's systematic documentation of my possessions, painted a troubling picture. They weren't just preparing for the possibility of my decline, they were actively planning for it. But it was a conversation I accidentally overheard between Marcus and Dr. Nick Nylon that truly alarmed me. They had stepped into my kitchen for what they thought was privacy while Edith distracted me with photo albums. Dr. Nylon was speaking in his professional capacity, but the subject was unmistakably personal. "The cognitive assessments are showing some concerning patterns," he was telling Marcus. "Short-term memory issues, difficulty with complex reasoning, spatial disorientation. Combined with the hearing loss, we're looking at a significantly diminished quality of life." "How diminished?" Marcus asked. "I mean in terms of her ability to make important decisions." "Well, that's where it gets complicated legally. She's not incompetent in the technical sense, but her capacity for financial decision-making is definitely compromised. A good attorney could probably make a case for guardianship if the family felt it was necessary." I had never undergone any cognitive assessments. Dr. Nylon had never administered any tests during his brief social visits. Yet here he was, discussing my supposed mental decline as if he had conducted thorough examinations. The realization that my own son-in-law was fabricating medical opinions about my competency sent chills down my spine. The most disturbing discovery came entirely by accident. Mabel had left her purse on the kitchen counter while helping me with lunch, and when she received a phone call, papers scattered across the floor. As I bent to help gather them, pretending to be confused about which papers belonged together, I caught sight of what appeared to be a detailed floor plan of my house. The document wasn't just a simple sketch, it was a professional architectural drawing showing room dimensions, noting features like original hardwood floors, updated electrical, and basement suitable for conversion. In the margins, someone had written notes about development potential and comparable sales data. When Mabel noticed my interest in the papers, she quickly gathered them with an embarrassed laugh. "Oh, those are just some things Marcus asked me to pick up from his office," she explained, speaking slowly as if I might somehow lip-read her words. "Nothing important, just boring paperwork." But I had seen enough to understand that someone was already treating my house as a development opportunity, complete with professional assessments and market analysis. The home where I had raised my children, where my husband and I had built our life together, was being evaluated like any other piece of real estate. That evening, after Mabel had retired to her room, I sat in my darkened living room processing everything I had observed over the past months. The pattern was undeniable. My children weren't just planning for my eventual care, they were actively positioning themselves to control my assets, my living situation, and ultimately my future. The woman they thought was deaf and increasingly confused was actually witnessing the systematic dismantling of her independence by the very people she had trusted most. The question was no longer whether something was wrong, but how far they were willing to go to achieve their objectives. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom that night, moving carefully in the darkness, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. It was time to stop being a passive observer and start gathering evidence. The complete scope of my family's betrayal revealed itself on a cold February morning when I made the mistake of coming downstairs earlier than usual. Mabel was in the kitchen making coffee, and I could hear voices in my living room, voices that weren't expecting me to overhear their conversation. Marcus was there with his wife Chloe Nylon, along with someone I didn't recognize, a man with a professional demeanor who was spreading documents across my coffee table. From the kitchen doorway, concealed by shadows, I watched them conduct what appeared to be a business meeting in my own home. The appraisal came in higher than we expected, the stranger was saying, pointing to papers on the table. $850,000, possibly more with the right marketing. The location is prime for redevelopment, tear down the existing structure, subdivide the lot, build 2 modern homes. My knees nearly buckled. They were discussing tearing down my house, the home where I had raised my children, where my husband and I had built our life together. Worse, they were talking about it as if the decision had already been made. "What about the timeline?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the same businesslike tone I'd heard during his phone calls. "The assisted living facility in Beaumont Hills has an opening in 6 months. Private room, 24-hour care, very discreet about transitions." "6 months should be plenty of time," the appraiser replied. "Once the competency evaluation is complete and you have full guardianship, the property transfer is straightforward. Clean title, no liens, everything properly documented. Competency evaluation, guardianship, property transfer." The words hit me like physical blows as I realized the full extent of their plan. They weren't just positioning themselves to inherit my assets. They were actively working to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could seize control while I was still alive. Chloe Nylon spoke up, her voice carrying a note of concern that seemed almost genuine. "Are we sure about the assisted living route?" Some of those places are so institutional. It's the most humane option, Marcus replied firmly. Mom can't live alone anymore, especially with her hearing gone and her memory issues getting worse. The facility is top-notch, and she'll be safe there. Memory issues getting worse. I had no memory issues. Dr. Nick Nylon had been fabricating medical assessments to support their narrative of my declining competency. The betrayal went deeper than I had imagined. They had enlisted a medical professional, my own son-in-law, to provide false evidence of my mental deterioration. The other siblings are on board, the appraiser asked. Edith is completely supportive, Marcus confirmed. She understands that Mom needs professional care, and she agrees that keeping the house would be impractical and expensive. Nick has some reservations, but he'll come around when he sees how much his share will be worth. And the youngest daughter, Marcus hesitated. Chloe is sentimental about family things. She might need more convincing, but she's also a teacher living paycheck to paycheck. When she realizes what her inheritance could mean for her future, she'll see reason. They had calculated everything, even my children's individual weaknesses and motivations. Edith's social ambitions, Nick's financial struggles, Chloe's emotional attachment to family, all of it had been analyzed and incorporated into their strategy. The key is moving quickly once the competency hearing is scheduled, the appraiser continued. Market conditions are favorable now, but real estate can shift. We want to close before summer if possible. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, fighting the urge to storm into the room and confront them immediately. But something held me back, perhaps the same instinct that had kept me silent for months. If I revealed myself now, they would simply accelerate their timeline. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan before taking action. What about the aide? Chloe Nylon asked. Mabel seems genuinely fond of her. Mabel is paid well to document everything, Marcus replied coldly. Her reports about Mom's daily confusion, her inability to manage simple tasks, her increasing dependence, it's all building the case we need for guardianship. The betrayal was complete. Even Mabel, whom I had grown to trust, whom I had welcomed into my home and treated with kindness, was systematically documenting false evidence of my incompetency. Every stumble I had faked, every moment of confusion I had performed to maintain my deaf facade, had been reported as genuine cognitive decline. Timeline? Marcus asked. Dr. Nylon files his medical assessment next week. The competency hearing should be scheduled within 30 days. Once that's resolved, we can move forward with the property sale and facility placement simultaneously. 30 days. I had 30 days before they would try to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized. 30 days before they would sell my home and divide the proceeds among themselves. 30 days before they would strip away everything I had worked for and lock me away in a facility where my protests would be dismissed, as the confused ramblings of an elderly woman with dementia. As the meeting broke up and the appraiser left through my front door, I slipped back upstairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and determination. The naive woman who had trusted her family implicitly was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood exactly what she was fighting against, and exactly what she needed to do to win. That night, as Mabel settled into her evening routine believing I was safely in bed, I crept down to my basement office, a small space that had once served as my late husband's workshop, but which I had converted into a private retreat years ago. Hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations was an old rotary phone that still worked, connected to a landline the family had forgotten existed. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Sandler and Associates, the law firm where I had worked for nearly 2 decades. It was past business hours, but I knew Theo Sandler often worked late, just as his father had before him. "Theo, it's Martha Beaumont," I whispered when he answered. "I need to see you immediately, and it has to be completely confidential." "Martha, I thought you had hearing problems. How are you?" "I can explain everything but not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere tomorrow? Somewhere my family won't see us." There was a pause as Theo processed this unexpected call from a woman his entire family believed was deaf. "The old church on Maple Street has been converted into offices. I have a consultation room there that I use for sensitive cases. 2 o'clock. Perfect. And Theo, bring your most experienced private investigator. I have a feeling we're going to need one." The next afternoon, I waited until Mabel left for her weekly grocery shopping trip, then slipped out through the basement door that opened into the wooded area behind my property. I hadn't driven in months, but my car still started, and the 15-minute drive to Maple Street felt like an escape from prison. Theo Sandler was waiting in a small, discreet office that retained some of the church's original stained glass windows. With him was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair. "Martha, this is Edith Hill," Theo said, then caught himself. "Not your daughter Edith. This is Edith Hill, our senior investigator, former FBI, specializes in financial crimes and elder abuse." The coincidence of the name felt like a sign. As I sat across from them in the quiet office, I began to tell my story from the beginning. Theo's expression grew increasingly grim as I described the systematic manipulation, the forged medical assessments, the secret appraisals of my property. "This is textbook elder abuse," Edith Hill said, taking notes in a careful shorthand. "Financial exploitation combined with a conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. The fact that it involves multiple family members and a medical professional makes it particularly serious." "What can we do?" I asked. "They have a competency hearing scheduled in less than a month." Theo leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly working through legal strategies. "First, we need documentation. Everything they've done, every conversation you've overheard, every document they've had you sign. Second, we need medical evidence that you're competent. Independent assessments from doctors they haven't influenced. And third," Edith Hill added, "we need to protect your assets immediately. If they have power of attorney over your financial accounts, they could drain everything before we can stop them." Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive counter-strategy. Edith Hill would conduct discreet surveillance, documenting Marcus's business activities and his connections to the property appraiser. Theo would arrange for independent medical and psychological evaluations to establish my competency. Most crucially, we would work to revoke the financial powers of attorney I had unknowingly granted and establish new protections for my assets. "The challenge," Theo explained, "is that we need to gather evidence without alerting them to your recovered hearing. If they realize you've been listening to their conversations, they either accelerate their timeline or destroy evidence." "How long can you maintain the pretense?" Edith Hill asked. "As long as necessary," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "I've been performing for months. I can continue until we're ready to act." We agreed on communication protocols. Theo would pose as a routine attorney handling estate planning updates, something that wouldn't seem suspicious to my family. Edith would work undercover, perhaps as a potential buyer interested in neighborhood properties. I would continue my charade while carefully documenting every conversation and gathering any physical evidence I could access. "Martha," Theo said as our meeting concluded, "I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about your children's intentions? This is your family we're talking about." The question hung in the air as I considered everything I had witnessed over the past months. The casual cruelty in their voices when they thought I couldn't hear. The calculated way they had manipulated my trust. The complete absence of genuine concern for my well-being beneath their performance of filial duty. My children died when they decided to treat me as an obstacle to their inheritance. I said quietly, the people living in their bodies are strangers who happen to share my DNA. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For too long I had been a passive observer of my own exploitation. Now finally, I was taking action to reclaim control of my life and future. The war for my independence was about to begin, and this time, I would be fighting with my eyes wide open. The following weeks became a delicate ballet of deception as I maintained my facade, while systematically gathering evidence against my own family. Every day required careful performance, balancing my supposed hearing loss with the need to document their betrayal. Edith Hill's surveillance work proved invaluable. Posing as a potential real estate investor, she photographed Marcus meeting with the appraiser at a coffee shop downtown, their conversation animated as they reviewed what appeared to be development plans. She documented his visits to the assisted living facility in Beaumont Hills, where he toured private rooms and discussed payment arrangements with the administrative staff. Most damning was her discovery that Marcus had already signed a preliminary purchase agreement with Millbrook Development Corp., a company that after deeper investigation turned out to be partially owned by his business partner. He wasn't just planning to sell my house, he was planning to sell it to himself at below market value, maximizing his profit from the eventual development. Meanwhile, Theo arranged for my independent medical evaluations, under the guise of routine health assessments. Martha Beaumont, a neurologist with no connection to my family, conducted comprehensive cognitive testing that proved my mental faculties were completely intact. A hearing specialist confirmed that my auditory function had returned to normal levels months ago. Mrs. Beaumont, Dr. Beaumont said after reviewing my test results, "You show no signs of cognitive decline whatsoever. Your memory, reasoning ability and decision-making capacity are all well within normal ranges for someone of any age, let alone someone in their 70s. These assessments would serve as crucial evidence when the time came to challenge Dr. Nick Nylon's fabricated medical reports. But first, I needed to secure my financial assets before Marcus could drain them completely. The most challenging part was accessing my own financial records without arousing suspicion. During one of Marcus's visits, while he reviewed papers with Mabel in the kitchen, I managed to photograph several documents he had left on my coffee table. Bank statements showing transfers I hadn't authorized. Investment portfolio changes that had moved my conservative mutual funds into riskier ventures that happened to benefit his development projects. But the most shocking discovery came when I found a copy of a new will among his papers, a document bearing my forged signature that left everything to Marcus as primary beneficiary, with small token amounts for his siblings. According to this fraudulent will, my house, investments and savings would all pass directly to him upon my death or incapacitation. The systematic nature of their fraud was breathtaking. They hadn't just planned to steal my assets, they had created an entire paper trail to make it appear legal and legitimate. Every document I had signed during my supposed confusion had been part of building this false narrative. Theo worked quietly to revoke the financial powers of attorney, establishing new accounts at a different bank where Marcus had no access. We transferred the bulk of my assets to these protected accounts, leaving just enough in the original accounts to avoid immediate detection. The beauty of this approach, Theo explained during one of our clandestine meetings, is that they won't realize what's happened until they try to access the funds. By then we'll be ready with our evidence. During this period, I also began testing my children's true intentions through careful manipulation of my own behavior. I started leaving valuable items in different locations around the house, then pretending to be confused about where I had put them. Within days, Edith would find these items and suggest keeping them safe at her house. I deliberately knocked over a small vase, one worth several $100s, and observed their reactions. While Chloe immediately rushed to help clean up the pieces with genuine concern, Marcus and Edith exchanged meaningful glances that clearly communicated their thoughts. The old woman was becoming more clumsy and confused. "Maybe we should put away some of the more fragile things," Edith suggested to Marcus. For Mom's safety, their eagerness to remove valuable items from my house, supposedly for my protection, revealed the true depth of their planning. They weren't just stealing my future, they were systematically stripping away my present. The most painful test came when I pretended to have a minor medical episode, sitting down suddenly and appearing disoriented during one of Nick's visits. While Chloe rushed to get me water and check my pulse, Nick pulled out his phone, not to call for medical help, but to text someone about the incident. Later, I overheard him reporting to Marcus, "She had another episode today," seemed confused about where she was for about 10 minutes. The decline is definitely accelerating. There had been no episode, no confusion, no decline. But Nick's willingness to fabricate medical emergencies for their legal case proved that even my most honest child had been corrupted by the promise of inheritance money. As the date of the competency hearing approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. The hurt and betrayal had crystallized into something harder and more focused. These people had systematically destroyed my trust, exploited my supposed vulnerability, and planned to steal everything I had worked for over 7 decades. Now it was time to show them exactly how capable their supposedly confused, deaf old mother really was. With only 3 days remaining before the scheduled competency hearing, I decided it was time to orchestrate the final act of my deception. Everything had to unfold perfectly. One wrong move would give my family the opportunity to destroy evidence or accelerate their timeline before I could expose them. The plan required precise timing and one crucial prop, the inheritance papers that would ultimately become the centerpiece of my revelation. Working with Theo, we prepared a fake set of documents that appeared to be my authentic last will and testament, complete with official-looking seals and legal language. This decoy will named Marcus as the primary beneficiary of my entire estate, exactly as he expected. We made sure the papers looked worn and handled, as if they had been stored in my personal safe for years. On Monday morning, I called Marcus using the basement phone, disguising my voice to sound like an elderly woman from the probate court's office. "Mr. Beaumont, this is regarding your mother's competency hearing scheduled for Thursday.
Oh,
We need someone to retrieve some documents from her personal safe for the proceedings. Legal papers that will be needed for the asset evaluation." Marcus took the bait immediately. "Of course, what kind of documents?" "Her will primarily, along with any other estate planning materials. Standard procedure for these hearings. You'll need to retrieve them before Thursday." That afternoon, I watched from my bedroom window as Marcus arrived with a locksmith, explaining to Mabel that the court needed access to my important papers. I had made sure to be napping upstairs, appearing confused and disoriented when they briefly checked on me. While they worked on my safe downstairs, I slipped down to listen from the kitchen. The locksmith opened my safe easily, and I heard Marcus rifling through the contents. "Here it is," he said with satisfaction. "Mom's will, just like we expected. Everything's in order." What he didn't realize was that he was holding our carefully crafted decoy. The real will, the one that truly reflected my wishes, was safely stored in Theo's office, along with all the evidence we had gathered. For the next 2 days, I maintained my performance while observing Marcus's increased confidence. He moved through my house with a new sense of ownership, measuring rooms and making notes about modifications. He even brought Chloe Nylon by to discuss their plans for redecorating. Once I was settled in the assisted living facility, "We'll keep some of Mom's furniture for sentimental value," he told his wife as they stood in my living room. "But most of this old stuff will have to go. The new buyers will want everything updated and modernized." On Wednesday evening, I made my final preparations. I dressed carefully in my best navy dress and pearls, the same outfit I had worn to my husband's funeral 33 years earlier. If this was going to be the day I reclaimed my dignity, I wanted to look like the strong woman I had always been beneath their assumptions of helplessness. I practiced my voice quietly in the bathroom mirror, preparing for the moment when I would finally speak after 3 years of silence. The words that would shatter their world had to be delivered with perfect clarity and unmistakable authority. Tomorrow the performance would end. Tomorrow Martha Beaumont would rise from the ashes of her family's betrayal and take back everything they thought they had stolen. The woman they had tried to silence was about to find her voice. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I prepared for what would be the most important performance of my life. Marcus arrived early with the inheritance papers tucked under his arm, his confidence radiating as he greeted Mabel and settled into my living room. "Today's the day, Mom," he said, speaking slowly and loudly as he had for months. "We're going to get you the help you need." Edith arrived next with her husband Dr. Nick Nylon, both dressed formally for the court hearing. Chloe came last, looking genuinely distressed about the proceedings, but resigned to what she believed was necessary for my care. "I still think there might be other options," Chloe said quietly to Marcus as they gathered around my coffee table. "Maybe if we hired more help, she could stay in her own home." "Don't be naive," Edith replied sharply. "Mother can't live alone anymore. The hearing loss, the confusion, the memory issues. She needs professional care." Nick sat beside me, checking his watch impatiently. "The hearing is in 2 hours. We should review the medical documentation one more time." As they discussed my future as if I weren't present, Marcus pulled out the inheritance papers, spreading them across the table with satisfaction. "At least we know her wishes are clearly documented. When the time comes, everything will be handled according to her instructions." This was the moment I had been waiting for. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching my own children plot against me. 3 years of being treated like a burden, rather than the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise them. I stood up slowly from my chair, my movement deliberate and steady. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expecting the usual confused shuffling of an elderly woman with hearing problems. Instead, I walked directly to Marcus and picked up the inheritance papers from the table. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and strong after years of silence, "these aren't my real wishes at all." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Marcus's face went white. Edith gasped and nearly dropped her purse. Dr. Nick Nylon stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. Chloe's eyes filled with tears as the implications of my spoken words sank in. But it was Marcus who reacted most dramatically. The inheritance papers slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, scattering across my living room floor, like autumn leaves. "You can hear," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been able to hear for almost 3 years," I replied calmly. "Every conversation, every plan, every cruel word you thought I couldn't understand." The silence that followed was deafening. 28 years of motherhood, of believing I had raised honest, caring children, crumbled in that moment of recognition. The people staring at me weren't my family anymore. They were strangers who had been systematically planning to steal my life. "How long have you known?" Edith asked, her voice shaking. "Long enough," I answered, "to protect myself from all of you." The silence in my living room stretched on as my children grappled with the complete collapse of their carefully constructed plans. Marcus was the first to attempt damage control, his business instincts kicking in despite his shock. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone he used with difficult clients. "Everything we've done has been for your protection." "When we thought you couldn't hear, stop," I interrupted, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't used in years. "I heard exactly what you said to the property appraiser. I know about the development plans, the assisted living facility, and the competency hearing you scheduled without my knowledge." Dr. Nick Nylon stood abruptly, his face flushed with professional embarrassment. The medical assessments were based on observed symptoms. As a doctor, I had to document what I saw. "What you saw," I replied coldly, "were the performances of a woman pretending to be confused, to see how far her own family would go to betray her. Every stumble, every moment of supposed disorientation, all deliberate." Edith began crying then, but whether from guilt or frustration at being caught, I couldn't tell. "Mother, we were trying to help you. The house is too big, you're getting older." "I'm 78, not dead," I snapped. "And I'm certainly not incompetent, despite your husband's fraudulent medical reports." Chloe, who had remained silent through this exchange, finally spoke. "Mom, I never wanted any of this. I thought you really needed help. Yet you went along with it," I observed. "When did you stop seeing me as your mother, and start seeing me as an inheritance?" Before anyone could answer, the doorbell rang. Mabel moved to answer it, but I held up my hand. "That will be my attorney, Theo Sandler, and Detective Mateo Hill from the County Fraud Division. I called them this morning." Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. "You can't be serious. We're your family." "Family doesn't forge medical reports," I replied, looking directly at Dr. Nick Nylon. "Family doesn't secretly appraise each other's homes for development potential. And family certainly doesn't try to have their mother declared incompetent to steal her assets." As Theo and Detective Hill entered my living room, the full weight of the situation became clear to my children. This wasn't just a family confrontation, it was the beginning of serious legal consequences. "Mrs. Beaumont," Detective Hill said formally, "are you ready to provide your statement regarding the elder abuse and fraud allegations?" "I am," I replied, then turned to face my children one final time. "Marcus, the competency hearing is cancelled. Dr. Nylon, your medical license will be reviewed for filing false reports. Edith, any items you've removed from my house need to be returned immediately." I paused, looking at each of them in turn. "And all of you need to understand that as of today, you are no longer welcome in my home or my life." The inheritance papers still lay scattered on my living room floor, a fitting symbol of their shattered plans and my reclaimed independence. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my renovated home, preparing Sunday dinner for a very different kind of family gathering. The house had been transformed, just as I had been, but not in the way Marcus and Edith had envisioned. The investigation had moved swiftly. Dr. Nick Nylon faced medical board sanctions for falsifying patient records. Marcus's real estate license was suspended pending fraud charges. The property appraisal scheme unraveled when Detective Hill discovered the financial connections between Marcus and Millbrook Development Corp. But the most satisfying outcome hadn't been their legal troubles. It had been discovering who my real family was. Chloe had been the only one to reach out after that devastating Thursday morning, arriving at my door 3 days later with tears in her eyes and genuine remorse in her voice. "I should have questioned what was happening," she had said, sitting at my kitchen table where we had shared so many Friday dinners. I should have listened to my instincts instead of going along with what seemed like the responsible thing to do. Her apology was heartfelt, but more importantly, her actions proved her sincerity. She helped me through the legal proceedings, attended every hearing, and stood by me as I rebuilt my life from the foundation up. The renovation of my house had been more than cosmetic. It was symbolic. I converted Marcus's old bedroom into a library where I could finally read all the books I had never had time for during my working years. Edith's room became an art studio where I discovered a talent for watercolor painting that had been dormant for decades. My new will, properly executed with Theo's guidance, reflected my true wishes. The bulk of my estate would establish the Martha Beaumont Foundation for Elder Rights, dedicated to preventing the kind of abuse I had experienced. Chloe would receive enough to pursue her dream of becoming a principal without financial worry. The rest would go to organizations that protected vulnerable seniors. Most surprisingly, my story had attracted attention beyond Millbrook. A journalist writing about elder abuse had featured my case in a national magazine, and I found myself receiving invitations to speak at conferences about financial exploitation of seniors. "You've become something of a celebrity," Theo had joked during our last meeting. The grandmother who outsmarted her own family. But I didn't feel like a celebrity. I felt like a woman who had finally learned to value herself as much as she had valued others. This Sunday's dinner guests weren't related by blood but by choice. Chloe and her new boyfriend, a fellow teacher who treated her with the respect she deserved. Theo and his wife, who had become genuine friends, Detective Hill and his partner, who stopped by monthly to check on my well-being. As I set the table with my good china, no longer saved for special occasions because I had learned that every day of authentic living was special, I reflected on the unexpected gift my children's betrayal had given me. For 78 years, I had defined myself through my relationships with others, daughter, wife, mother. Now finally I was simply Martha Beaumont, a woman who had found her voice and refused to be silenced again. The sound of laughter from my living room filled the house with genuine warmth, replacing the cold calculations that had echoed through these rooms during my 3 years of strategic silence. I had lost my children, but I had found myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance of all.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.